Hariam girls, as a continuation to the previous video, in this video we are going to discuss how an SQL data provider can be used for creating a connection and performing the database operations. In our previous video we have seen how to create a SQL connection. Using this statement, you can create a connection object with the new operator, and you have to provide these parameters which will be connecting to your database. And we have also seen what are these parameters are and how to establish the connection using Windows authentication, right? And we have also seen what do you mean by the security support provider interface. Now, here in this video, we are going to talk about how the SQL command object is created and how do we perform the database operations. Now, SQL command object is used for specifying what type of interaction you want to perform with the database. What is the kind of interaction you want to perform with the database? Whether you want to have a select query, or you want to have insertion, or you want to have modification, or you want to delete some set of records, etc., can be specified using the SQL command. So if you want to have the SQL command object to be created, you can use the new operator again, specify the class name as SQL command, and you have a command object here. Then as a constructor that takes two arguments. The first argument will be the SQL query. And the second argument is the connection object. So your SQL command, the command object is to be created with the new operator that takes two arguments. What are they? The first argument will be the SQL query, and the second argument will be the connection object. So to whichever database you want to do the manipulation, that connection object must be specified here as the second argument. Okay. So once you have created the SQL command, then you can go for querying the data. So for querying the data, what do? You have to instantiate a new command with a query and connection, which you will specify new SQL command and the query and the connection object. So once you have completed the creation of command object, the next thing that you are going to do is you are going to call the execute reader. Remember, if you are going to retrieve the data, selection procedure is the one which you are going to do. Then you will be using the execute reader. I am using the select query. Select query retrieves the data from the database. So I need a reader. That is why you are using execute reader method. We have already seen the command object will have many execute methods, different execute methods. So if you are going to do insert query, if you are going to do update query, a different execute method you will be using. If you are going to use select query, then the execute reader method we will be using. We will be discussing everything in detail in the upcoming slides. Okay. So what we do here, I am going to call the execute reader method. The command object will be invoking the execute reader method, which will be returning a data reader object. It will be returning a data reader object. So RTR now becomes the data reader, which is a forward only, read only reader object, and this stores the retrieved records of this particular query. Okay. Then if you want to insert your data, what you're going to do? First you can go for preparing the command string. So this is optional, right? So the query you can create as a string. You can create it as a string. Then you can pass it as an argument here, or you can directly specify the query here. And if you are going to prepare it as a separate command string, you can observe here I am using the string variable and I am using @ symbol. What is this @ symbol specify? This is a verbatim string. Remember, we have already discussed in our previous classes. We have seen what are the different types of strings available and what do you mean by a verbatim string also we have discussed. So I just prefix @ symbol. So it says whatever notations I am going to use, that will not be processed here. And then I start with the query, insert into table name, and the table columns I have specified and the values I have passed. Right? So this is just a sample. Now once you have prepared the command string, what do? You can create a command saying new SQL command and the insert string. See, observe here. In the previous example what we have given, the string is directly given in the SQL command argument. Whereas here I have prepared the string, the SQL string I have prepared separately. Then I passed this as the variable here. And the second argument is obviously the connection object. Now you observe the insert query is not used for retrieving the data. It is used for storing the data into the database. So I cannot use the execute reader method. What I am doing? I am using execute non-query. I am using execute non-query method. So that is why it says the command object has different execute methods. What is the first method we have seen? Execute reader, which is used for retrieving data from the database. Execute non-query, which is used for storing the data into the database. So it is not returning any value. You simply say command object dot execute non-query. Fine. Okay. Now suppose you want to update the data. So what are the things we have seen? Select query, and if you want to do the insert query, you can do like this. And if you want to update the data in a database, what you are going to do? You can use the execute non-query method, and this is the method which is also used for updating the data. The following code shows how to update the data. So as usual, you can go for preparing the command string. What do you do here? You are going to create the string. Again, this is also a verbatim string. Say update table name, set column name equal to value, where you can give some clauses here, where condition you can specify. So if the category name is miscellaneous, I change the category name to other. That's it. Okay. Then what do you do? This is just the update query command preparation. Then this update query can be passed to the SQL command. I am showing you where different methods of creating the command, SQL command. I am passing the update string, right? Now you can observe here I am not giving the second argument, right? I am not giving the second argument. Whereas in the previous examples what I have given, I gave the second argument here as the connection object. I gave the second argument as the connection object. Now I am not giving connection object here, right? This is also possible. So this is another way of creating your SQL command. You just pass the string now. Then what you can do, use the command object, then specify the connection property is equal to connection object. This is also possible. So this is another way of writing. So three different ways of creating the SQL command we have seen. What are they? In the first case, The SQL query is given directly as the first argument. Connection object is given directly as the second argument in the SQL command. In the second example, what we have seen, the query is created as a string variable or a string object. Then you passed the string object and the connection object. In the third example, what we have seen, I passed only the string object. The string object contains the query. Then I am using the connection property of the command object. Then I assign connection. So automatically the connection will be established. Then you can, as usual, use your execute non-query, because update method is also used for storing the data into the database and not for retrieving the data. So execute non-query will be updating the data in your database. Now, suppose you want to scalar values, right? Obviously, when you have studied your database, PSQL, PostgreSQL database manipulation, you might have studied how to retrieve a scalar values also, single values also, right? So even you are going to use something like count, max, min, all these what do you call it as the scalar values, you can retrieve using these commands. So what do? You instantiate a new command saying SQL command select count star from category. So this will be returning how many number of records are there from the table categories. Now when you are going to retrieve this is going to return, this select command is not going to return record set. Instead this is going to return a single value. So what do? You can't use your execute method, you can't use your execute reader, you can't execute, sorry, this is not called execute, execute scalar method, okay. So this query is retrieving the data, of course, from the database, but it is not retrieving a record set. What is it retrieving? It is retrieving a scalar value. So what I do? I am not using execute reader. I am not using execute non-query. Instead, I am using a method called execute scalar. And if the scalar value is going to return integer, you just typecast it to integer and you store it in the variable, whatever variable you want to have. Okay, so these are the three possible execute methods that you can have for the SQL command. What are the three methods? One is execute reader, another one is execute non-query, and the third one is execute scalar. And in these three slides, we have seen how SQL command can be created in a different way and how the different execute methods can be used for manipulating the database. Fine. Now this slide shows you how you can read data from the SQL data reader. Because when you are going to use execute reader, it is going to retrieve all the records and it will be storing it in the data reader. So you should have some means to retrieve these data from the data reader. Okay. So for which I am using the read method, and this can be put in an iteration. So until you reach the end of record, the read method will be used for reading the data. So you can use your while statement. You can say rdr.read. So if there is a record, the read method will return true. If there is no more record, if it reaches end of record, then the read method will be returning false. So please make a note of it. The read method returns true if there is a data in the reader, it returns false when it reaches end of record. So if I want to get the data, you can specify the reader name, reader object name, then within square bracket you can either specify the column name, or you can give the index. You can see here in our example, in our MySQL example, we have used the index. In the MySQL example, along with the reader, I have used the index. 0 for the first column, 1 for the second column, 2 for the third column. Or if you are not sure about the column numbers, you can directly specify the column name. You can directly specify the column name as a string. And whatever data is being returned by this particular column, that must be typecasted. Then you store it in the variable, whichever variable you want to have. And you can print out the result. So you get the contact name, you get the company name, you get the city name. That can be displayed here using the console.writeLine. So this is console application. If you are going to move it to the text box, that can also be done. If it is a desktop application or a web application, you can move it to a user control. So here I have just specified how this data can be printed in a console. Whereas in our example demo program, we have seen the data values are moved. The data values are moved to the text boxes. This is also possible, right? Whereas here it shows I just retrieve the data from the database and I am just displaying it in the console. So once you have retrieved all the data, you can close the SQL data reader just like you close the SQL connection, and you can wrap the data access code in a try block always, because whenever you are using your database manipulation, there are chances that there is no database connection or there is some error in your query, etc. So it is always safe to wrap your data access code in a try and catch block. And you can always close your data reader or your database in the finally block. So put it in your try block, then in the finally you can have catch blocks here, then in the finally block you can close the data reader. Okay. Now when you want to delete your data, again deleting a data is you do some changes in the database. So create your delete string that specifies the delete query, which is again a verbatim string. You can create a SQL command, and observe here. This is the fourth way of creating the SQL command. I am not passing any argument here in the SQL command. I am just creating the command. Then I am using a property called as command text. There I am storing the SQL query. Then I am using the connection property, store the connection object. Then you can use execute non-query. So this is the fourth way of creating the SQL command. So we have seen 4 different ways. What are they? The first way is using the SQL query directly along with the connection object. Second way, the string is created, connection string, not connection string. This is the SQL query string is created as a string object. Pass the string object and the connection object as arguments. Third way, you pass only the SQL string and the connection object is passed as the the connection object is passed using the connection property of the command object. Then the fourth method, I am just creating a SQL command without any parameter. Then later I am going to change the command text and the connection property by assigning the values. This is also possible. So these are the different ways of using the SQL connection object, SQL command object and SQL data reader. These are the three core objects we have seen in the SQL manipulation of SQL data provider. Okay, the SQL command object and how execute reader can be used, how execute non-query can be used, how execute scalar can be used, and how you can read the data using the SQL data reader, and how a delete query can be executed. So we will discuss the data set and SQL data adapter in the next video. Thank you.